So the way I would approach this is, did you already have your recruiter kind of check in? Like, did they already kind of ask you a couple of salary clarifying questions?
Originally, I told him that I'd be okay with the top of the pay range, but it hasn't been mentioned, and I'm nearing the end of the interview process.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So just in case anyone was, depending on your state, it is illegal to ask for compensation history. So, New York State is one of them. California is one of them. Colorado is one of them. There's about 20 states in the US where like they cannot ask you what you were making before. They can only ask it in a way that's like, how much do you want to make in your future, in this future opportunity? What would be your salary expectations? A lot of people try to ask you clarifying questions because, as you can tell with some of these postings, I think it's great to have paid transparency, but it's also most of the time that means that this person asked for the top of the range, right? So if you want to volunteer that, hey, for my needs, and you don't have to justify it, by the way, they're like, in fact, I really recommend you don't justify it. You can say something along the lines of, my expectations for my next role are X. I noticed that is the top of your range. Can you walk me through if that's total compensation? So a lot of the time, what they're listing is total compensation. It might not just be base, and you want to ask what your offer is kind of before clarifying, if that makes sense. So if they're saying that the range is between 150 to 165, you want to clarify, like, if that's base, if that includes any sort of bonus potential, if that includes any equity, and say it's just base. You can say, my expectations are, like, let's just use 165 as the number, as the top of the range. I was making 165 at my last role. I would prefer, at least like a 10 to 15% jump. I'm open to what that kind of looks like in terms of factors, so we can talk about bonus and equity, but I would make sure that your closable number is that top of the range, because you're already at that range and you ideally don't want to take a pay cut.
Okay, I have the final interview like within like the next week or so. So hypothetically, if that does go well, is this something I'm guessing this is something I should mention once I get an offer, if I get an offer. Um, how do
Yeah,
I set
a
this up?
lot of good recruiters, and the ones that I've seen that have really resonated, is like having that conversation quickly and often. So every single time that you're checking in, I'm not sure if your recruiter is checking back in with you and saying like, hey, how did that step go? How does that feel? Do you have questions? So if you go the route of, if you're talking to your recruiter, I'm not sure how hands-on they are. Can you let me know if they are? Are they like checking in after every interview, or like how are they kind of trying to close you during the candidate
No
experience?
checking in at all, honestly.
Oh,
Just
really?
scheduling the next interview.
Okay. How many interviews have there been so far?
I've had one take home and two interviews.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So do they have like a 4 interview process? So it looks like, there was a recruiter screen, a take home test, an interview, and a final interview. So is there about 4?
I'm sorry, I wasn't including the recruiter screen as an interview, but I did have that.
Okay, cool. And she did ask, or they did ask, about questions around your comp?
Yes, I said I'd be interested in the top of the range, um, but I don't know if they took that to be like, oh,
Yeah,
the
sure.
exact top of the range, or like within like
Yeah. I
X
mean,
amount
you're
of
allowed
dollars
to
of
like
it.
have clarifying comments or questions. So if you're comfortable putting it in writing, feel free to just follow up with the recruiter and just be like, notice that we're approaching the final interviews. I just want to make sure that we're on the same level about compensation. Can we discuss this over a call? Or, if you prefer call, if you want to just say like, just clarifying that my expectations are at X, and if that's, realistic for this role, I think just clarifying it is always a healthy thing to do.
I know that typically when people are interviewing for positions and they've chosen a applicant that they want to give the position to, that they're like willing to be a bit more flexible because they don't want to have to go through the interview process like another time and waste more time and resources.
Yeah.
So is it something you would recommend that I do towards the end once I receive an offer, or I go ahead and I reach out to them now?
I mean, you're definitely scheduled for that final interview now, right? Like you're pretty sure that like that's already been handled. It's happening next week.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I mean, the most viable option for both sides and both parties is ideally they're recruiting this so that they're filling the position, and you're ideally going through the process that if they made an offer, it's realistic for you to accept. So if you feel comfortable with your recruiter or somebody that's like kind of impartial to the process, like it's a little bit more awkward to negotiate with your boss, for example. You do have the most negotiation power when you have an offer in hand. But you know, hopefully like this person's good and reads between the lines and has a note at least in your profile. But if you're worried that that hasn't happened, I would just clarify it before your interview, your final interview.
Okay.
And I would just try to get like some sort of confirmation that they can at least meet you there. So that way you're not going into that final interview thinking like, you know, sometimes they're like, sometimes it's true what they say where their hands are tied. Like I know that ours are, we do have a specific budget that we have to follow. And we do have specific roles and we're pretty honest with our candidates about that. Like we have a content analyst role at our company. And the range is anywhere between 80 to 85 because it's a more junior role. And we tell that to every single candidate. We do get candidates that reach back out and they're like, hey, like, I would love 90, but we were very consistent in the process that like, we were like, hey, this is what what published ranges are. And this is like what our situation is when it comes to the budget. It doesn't seem like your situation is that similar. And it seems like if they're excited about you, ideally recruiters are not having you go through the process and have a deep understanding of what you're looking to make and that they can't deliver on that because that's just a bad outcome for everybody.
What's interesting though is that my recruiter changed during the process. So my initial recruiter screening was with one person, and then after that, somebody else took over.
Okay, then it's even more, you know, important to kind of clarify, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did somebody took over, but you never talked to that person?
Not over the phone or anything. Only like to schedule interviews.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, yeah, then you have even more of an excuse. I think what's hard for candidates is like you do have to really advocate for yourself. Like recruiters do try, but like obviously you've kind of seen the demolition that's been the market. A lot of people are applying to all these companies and there's like, you know, not even a recruiting team there anymore. So that being said, you know, I think it's important to give grace in some aspects, but yeah, just kind of clarifying and advocating for yourself is going to be important in the process.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Did that answer your question? Do you want to spend some more minutes on it if I wasn't clear?
No, you're saying basically I should reach out to clarify my expectations and
yeah, and especially knowing the fact that there's a recruiter change in the middle of it, I just want to make sure that you're being advocated as well as you can be. In terms of, so I'm not a huge game player. I'm not saying that you should have to play games to get what you want. I think I come from a place of like, this is how transparent I want to be, and this is how I want to do it. And the reason that I'm saying this way is because a lot of companies have different rules. So at my company, we're less than 100 people, but we still give, you know, people 3 business days. And our ideal outcome is like we're getting to a place where we're not playing games with the candidate, where it's like not some sort of negotiation tool. And we're not hopefully trying not to give offers to people being like, oh, you know what, they'll negotiate. So we'll give them a 10%. Like we'll plan on them negotiating. So we'll just inflate our offer by 10%. So it depends on your relationship to the company. I think being as open and as transparent as possible to lock it down is helpful. If you're doing a bunch of offers and entertaining a bunch of offers and trying to put them together, so like, you know, you're basically doing a little bit of a bidding war. There's a lot of things that are more important. Well, not more important, but like, you know, money is obviously a huge important component. But I think also going to a company that is aligning with your values is important. I'm not saying all these companies play great, like by the rules. I'm not saying any of those things, but it depends on your values. If that's something that you want to do because you inherently believe that you deserve more than what you're getting, I would hopefully I think the more effective track is saying like, this is where I would love to be fairly compensated at. This is how I think would make sense. A lot of companies also would kind of, do a little bit of back planning, right? Because they want to close this position. There's definitely other people that are interested. So they might advance someone else just to have a backup plan. But if you really want this company, if you're really excited about this company and you know what number would make sense for you and it's realistic and it's been discussed and it's in their range and you've had multiple conversations about it, hopefully they're giving you an offer that feels good to you versus, you signing on the last day, for example. I also have worked at companies where there is no last day and it's kind of just out in limbo. So I think that it's a mixed answer for your question. It really depends on the company. And I know that's not as helpful as saying like you should play or you shouldn't play. If you feel comfortable doing that, I definitely don't want to suggest that you shouldn't. I just also think that depending on your brand, your market, like how you negotiate also really matters. Like if you're accepting a company.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I couldn't decide when I read it if that was good advice or not, because I was like, and I don't love the idea of playing games either. I just kind of want everyone to be honest and open. Let's just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I was like,
you really need something to be adjusted, but I would assume you would want to say that on the first day.
Yep. Can I ask a follow-up question? Or
yeah, of course, absolutely.
I guess sort of a follow-up question. What if the initial offer is actually quite good and you like it? Should you still negotiate and try to do like 3 or 5% more, or just go with it? What do you do if you're actually happy with the initial offer?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is also personal preference. I will say that when I got this job, I was approached at like a venture capital fund and I was friends with the person and he was starting the company. And this was 3 years ago. And I felt like the offer he gave me was fair. Like I was like, oh, okay, this is like a fair offer for a director of talent situation. And I knew that they weren't bringing any revenue and things like that. But, now 3 years later, I got a raise. I got 2 raises. But I feel like I probably, even if I was happy with that offer, it was still, even if I asked for 5 or, $6K more, it would have just mitigated some of the inflation pieces. So I've always regretted not negotiating. I haven't done it much in my career. I've only had, like in the last 13 years, I probably only had 4 jobs or so, 4 or 5 jobs or so. And I've always regretted it every single time, but it's hard to do it as a black and white situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Most of the time I would say yes, like there's always a little bit of wiggle room, but I do think it's the most power you'll ever have in a negotiation. Like when is that offer piece? So like asking for 2 or 6K more.
Yeah, that's what I've heard also. That's your best chance. So, and it's 3 to 5% your recommendation on what to ask for, or up to 10%? What would be?
I mean, I would say 3 to 5 is what I've worked with that has succeeded really well in the past. And I feel like, and Lexi makes a good point in the chat here in terms of job market. I will say this is one of the tougher job markets I've seen in the last 10 years. I mean, but, I kind of hate that talk of it sometimes because, according to whoever you talk to, it's either like we're in a recession or we're approaching a recession, like inflation is at an all-time high, and it feels a little bit negative all the time and a little bit panicky. If it's an offer that you feel really good about, I don't think it hurts. But I also have noticed that a lot of people tend to ask only for the money versus like something that's a little bit more soft. Like negotiation can take a lot of forms, and a lot of people think that cash is the only way. But say that you have a hybrid workforce and it's 3 days a week, but you know that you work the best with 1 day a week in the office, like that's a negotiation tactic and it doesn't cost the employer any money. Or adding like a retention bonus, like adding a sign-on bonus, because that's 1 year of non-recurring revenue for the company. But it could also be $10,000 for you as a one-time sign-on bonus to maybe even cover the bonus that you're walking away from. There's a lot of inventive ways to ask. I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And it can be absolutely respectful and still, feel like a good situation for both sides. I've seen negotiations go badly when people demand too much and then change their ask at the end of the negotiation. So this is like a mixed bag of a question in some ways, because so usually if it's a 31% layoff, it usually means that things are not good. So it usually means that like there's definitely not much that the team either has, or like, there's just like kind of a good amount of, I would say there's probably a good amount of people just being that are either freaked out about their next step. A 31% layoff is just pretty sizable. So I'm not saying it's tone deaf per se, but it depends on your timing. If it's right after the layoffs, the chances of it kind of going through are probably pretty low for the most part. It seems like either way, you might want to look, just given that they have a 31% layoff. If you already have a counteroffer, it depends on the company. Most people in my position don't really believe in the counteroffer, because there's something that is most of the time, 99% of the time that we do a counteroffer, they leave within 6 months anyway. So I feel like there might be something more than just the money that is making you want to look.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the reason I took the interview is because they told us like a month ago that this layoff was going to happen.
Sure.
And so just everyone has been freaked out, right? And so I wrote a resume for the first time in 19 years and joined Leopard, and, have been looking around. And in 2 weeks, I have my first panel interview. So I'm just strategizing, right? Like, I feel like I've been underpaid anyway, and then like we didn't get any bonuses last year or this year, and the RSUs are worth like nothing. And so I'm like, I feel like I could get so much more, probably somewhere else. But I thought normally you kind of give your current company, if you have a good relationship with them, like the courtesy of, trying to keep you.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely try it. I definitely don't think that there's anything bad with asking. Like I really stand by the old adage, I guess, that like, if you don't say that you want something or that you need something, and then like it's your final day and you're like, yeah, if this would have changed, I would have stayed. That wouldn't have been helpful to people at that time. It does seem like the company has bigger financial issues, so it just might be harder to get the ask that you're looking for. Usually if it's a 31% layoff, and this is only because I've either been laid off or I've had to do a bunch of layoffs. If it's 31%, that's pretty high. Like if it's like anywhere between like the lower percentages, like they can probably have, some departments that just kind of have not as much going on. If there's like, if there's
no, this is existential. It's absolutely existential. We were supposed to get acquired, and the acquisition was blocked by the EU. And so it's all over the news. You can Google it.
Well, definitely sounds like there's a lot of things at play.
And so the company is now trying to
have
stay.
a counteroffer in hand right now yet? Or
No. So I have the layoff is happening next week. I don't know why they gave us so much notice. Everyone's just interviewing.
Well, apparently Google also did the same thing. They said that there's going to be a layoff every 2 months. So they were like, I don't know why that was psychologically. I'm not sure why they did that, but yes, yeah, a lot of companies have just been trying to get ahead of it.
Honestly, I think what happened was they had a contingency plan, but they didn't think they were going to have to use it because they were clearly going to go through, and then it fell through and they freaked out because like, oh, this contingency plan no longer works. We need to make a new one. It takes time to make a new contingency plan. So they just they had to say something to the shareholders, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of terrible planning. But they're laying off 31%, and they're assuming that a bunch of people are on top of that are going to jump ship, and like it's very unclear.
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like you're getting covered either way. It sounds like you're interviewing because you should, and people think that you should show a counteroffer to an employer. You have no obligation to do that. You don't have to do that. You can just say, hi, I have a counteroffer. This is for what it is. I would love to prioritize you here because I've had a really great experience and performance. Is this viable? given the context you gave me, it would be really surprising for me if they were like, yeah, sure. But who knows, right? You never know. But I mean, once that happens and they say no, it's also, you have to leave, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Where it's
I know, so I was wondering.
yeah.
I'm not actually certain that I want to go with this other company. Like I happened to see the opening. I'm like, oh, I could do that job. And so I'm interviewing. It's literally my first time interviewing anywhere in 19 years. So I definitely need to do it, if for no other reason than the practice.
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep yourself fresh. I think it's
But I'm not
important to
entirely
get
certain
yourself
that I would actually make the move. I think it depends a lot on what the offer looks like, and also what happens at my current job.
Yeah, and it's also, you're
so-
benchmarking yourself, right? Like out from these conversations, you're like, wow, I probably am getting underpaid by 30%. And then you can it also gives you a little bit of momentum and a little bit of benchmarking for the next step, where it's, where do you want to grow? Is it really competition that you're trying to optimize? Is it work-life balance? Like right now, I love my job, right? But I'm hitting 3 years. We're hitting a little bit of a wall. I'm still willing to see it through, but that doesn't mean that company loyalty is amazing, but you should also definitely be loyal to yourself, and you should be number one. So that's something that I definitely optimize for.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you're saying maybe don't, unless I'm like, I don't know, maybe don't tell them unless I'm serious about I'm going to take this offer. Unless.
Well, I think that if it's something, yes, you should definitely, if you're going to take the offer and it's very serious to you, but ideal outcome. And let's work backwards. Ideal outcome, you would want to stay at your company if they can match you where you want to be?
Possibly. So like this other company that I have the interview with is in a different, kind of adjacent industry. So I need to do some more reading on it. I'm kind of like not 100% sold on moving to it or not. This other company is, it's like privately held by a major car manufacturer. So like they have money, but like I think that their equity is basically paper money, right? It's not worth anything. So, and they have their own financial things because one of their funders just dropped out. So it's not necessarily a sure thing, but I feel like it might be, if I went there, I probably would stay for a couple of years and then move again. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I like to view my career as a little bit more of like a jungle gym versus like a ladder. And I think that that's really been where I've been educated badly in the past. Everyone told me that a job that I take next needs to serve me in some way and it should be higher. And that is great, but there's a multitude of factors, right? Like COVID just happened. Sometimes you want to optimize for things that are like your growth versus the money piece, or the money piece versus the growth. My next role might be a lateral move, and that's like completely okay. But does it serve my 5 to 7 year goal of potentially being a VP of talent or running talent for my own company? Like, is that really serving that goal? So if that job is doing that for you, so it's been 19 years, I would look at the career that you've established at this company. Like, is it giving you what you want in terms of learning, things like that? It looks like the runway is a little bit more limited given their financial situation anyway. So if you want to just be covered and getting yourself out there, that seems like a healthy thing to do. Even if it means that you're going to ultimately stay with this company. But I view my jobs as it's not only investments of money, it's investments of time, right? So if it's not something that's actually serving me, I think that's really hard.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. I know that was a little bit of a mixed bag because, I understand what you mean about the tone deafness piece. I don't think it's tone deaf per se. Most of the time, if they're doing a layoff that size, though, they don't probably have that much money to.
I feel like they probably don't.
Yeah.
I also feel like women don't ask, and I should always ask myself in every situation, what would an overconfident man do?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Right?
What would an overconfident man do is right. They probably would ask. They wouldn't care that it's tone deaf. They would just be like, well, you get me and I deserve it. You know what I mean? Most of the time, though, and this is statistically true, a layoff of that nature probably only extends a runway by 6 months. So it's not really a good situation. It would have been a lot smarter if they didn't have to hire enough to warrant a 31% decrease in staff.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to do any layoffs while we were in whatever they call that period between the acquisition announcement and it closing or not closing. Amazon required us to not lay off any engineering. So now it's like, oh, well, we were maintaining headcount. We assumed that we were going to get saved by this exit, and then the exit didn't exit. And now we really need to rectify that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, it's completely understandable. With these bigger companies, especially, like, it's really hard, you know what I mean, to kind of see where they go. Sometimes, like, that's why a lot of people go a little bit smaller, but I've seen a very high percentage. It used to be that, like, when you went to a smaller company, that there would be a lower chance of you having a layoff. Now I've kind of seen it all across the board. So it really just kind of depends on what to do. And sometimes, you know, it's a really easy time because the layoffs are so common right now that they're just like, okay, this is a great time to cut our, you know, bottom 5% anyway. But does that make sense?
yes, thank you.
All right, cool. And it looks like we have a couple more questions in the chat. So Samantha, looks like, could asking for a raise now possibly increases the chances that she'll get laid off? It depends on the ask. Most of the time, no, but most people are identified for layoffs because of position versus person. So if you're already a low performer, obviously I would assume you wouldn't ask for a raise, just because it wouldn't probably make sense. But for the most part, asking for a raise does not mean you'll get laid off. But if your position is, you know, in a position where that it might be something that you have to cut, it's just one of those things that you have to cut. So it's more by position versus person, at least part of the layoffs that I've been a part of. And Lexi, I'm sorry, I didn't see your question about extending. Yes, that's totally fine. So I think you should ask if it makes sense. But if it's like, if it's a looming layoff that is going to cut 50% of the organization, most of the time it means that they can't afford a raise. Yes, you should be honest about the more time, but most of the time we do have like a bit of a clock when it comes to giving an offer. So my rule from a compliance perspective is like, I need to get an answer between an offer within 3 business days. Depending on how big the company is, you can be honest with them that like, hey, I have this other offer, I want to weigh this other offer and I need a week. And if that's doable for them, that's great. But for the most part, yeah, like you should ask for more time and just kind of be as communicative as possible to both parties. That way you can weigh either one. But if you're at the offer stage with both of those companies, it kind of means I would hope that you have enough information to kind of make a realistic decision for yourself, just because, you know, unless you're trying to leverage them both against each other. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying you can do that, but like with doing it the right way, I think will really matter. And that would mean, hey, I'm really interested in this other company. This is what they're offering. Is it possible for you to match that? And you just, you know, definitely do not justify. Just say that's what you want. And for the most part, that's like on the recruiter to get them what you want.